right into it. Okay, let's get started. So I'm Dan Rundy. I'm a Senior Vice President here at CSIS. I'm really grateful to have the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources at the State Department, Rich Verma. Ambassador Rich Verma is known in Washington as the nicest guy in Washington, one of the most decent people in Washington, one of the smartest people in Washington, and one of the most effective people in Washington. So I was really, when he asked us to host him, the answer, of course, was yes, like in capital letters, like, of course, we're going to do that. We're very fortunate as a country that he said yes to public service, and we're very fortunate that he's been entrusted to manage U.S. relations, pieces of the U.S. economic relationship with Ukraine, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I think everybody here knows that CSIS has done a ton of work with the help of many people in this room on the issue of Ukraine. We've done an enormous amount of scholarship. We've done more than 30 meetings, private meetings, more than 24 public meetings. We've produced 36 papers. We convened a high-level commission that has met 5 times. With the suggestion of my very smart and amazing former colleague, Elizabeth Hoffman. She said we need to take Hill staffers and we need to take members of Congress. So we groveled and begged and found the money for that. And Elizabeth is who isn't here right now, but I just want to give her a shout out. We've taken 25 or so Hill staffers and probably about a dozen members of Congress. Let me tell you a story about that. So all the research, all the stuff that you do at a think tank, like what's that matter? Well, one of the House members that we took was a Republican who was like not super jazzed about like supporting a Ukraine supplemental. So he went, he was kind of like, it was a little bit like this and a little bit kind of like, I'm not sure I'm like buying this. So he went and he saw all the things that you all who follow this carefully saw. He saw what happened in Bucha. He looked in the eyes of people who'd lost their homes or had terrible things happen to them, and he was moved. He's a very serious man of faith. His name is Chuck Edwards. He's a first-term member of Congress from a conservative district in western North Carolina. He's my friend. And so he came back. He said, I'm a convert on Ukraine. So as a junior House member in the Republican Party, you get kind of one dib a year to talk to the Republican conference in the House. So he used his one speech, like his one 60-second shot, 2 weeks before the vote for the April supplemental to say, I just came back, I'm a convert, and I went with CSIS, and I want you to vote for the House, in the House, for the supplemental for Ukraine. So when people say like, okay, like, well, what's the benefit of doing this stuff? You have to do the research, you have to do the convenings, but then you have to bring and enable and connect with decision makers. So one of the beauties of CSIS is we can convene across the political spectrum, and that was one of the things I think we're really proud of. So I'm proud to have done this with many, many people here at CSIS and work with my colleagues. So we're going to have a conversation with Ambassador Verma, but it's in the context of the work that we've been doing, and I think that's why Ambassador Verma and his really able team reached out to us, is because of this background. So I'm going to stop there, but I'll just say, like, I don't think Ambassador Verma needs much of an introduction with this group. It was just over a year ago that Secretary Penny Pritzker gave her first public appearance here as U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine's recovery during one of our Doing Business in Ukraine conferences. What I think would be most useful is for Deputy Secretary Verma to make some remarks, perhaps, and then I think we'll have a conversation. Does that make sense? Okay, come on over here. Thanks, Deputy Secretary. Okay.
Dan, thanks. Thanks so much. Your leadership on this topic has been essential. What you just shared about Congressman Edwards is so valuable, and I've had a chance to talk to him about Ukraine as well, and really a great public servant. So we're grateful for his involvement. We're grateful for all of your scholarship, everything that CSIS has done on Ukraine, and frankly, so many other subjects. I've had a long partnership with this great organization. Sat in this room probably 8 months ago to talk about the Secretary of State's modernization agenda. Sat with John Hamre a couple times over the years. So This is a pillar, and your work on Ukraine helps us so much, because this is a really hard set of issues. So I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. We did think this was the right time to tell you about what we've been doing on the economic recovery side. And so that's what we want to focus on today. So I have some remarks, and I look forward to your questions. You know, a little over a mile from here, on the corner of 22nd and Peace Streets, you can see a proud statue of one of Ukraine's greatest poets, Taras Shevchenko, in a park that Congress renamed Ukrainian Independence Park just last year. As many of you know, Shevchenko spent years in prison by the Tsarist Russian government because he supported a free and independent Ukraine. 165 years ago, he wrote words that still ring true today. He said, "It was so peaceful, so serene. We had just begun to break the chains that bind our folk in slavery, when halt, once again, the people's blood is streaming." And for what? Why are we here again? Because Russia cannot tolerate that Ukrainians want to determine their own future, their own economy, their own identity. Ukrainians have been made to pay for aspiring to their rightful place as an independent, transparent democracy integrated into international institutions and global markets, with their lives and livelihoods for 1,023 excruciating days of the Kremlin's barbaric, full-scale invasion. For more than 2.5 years, Putin has pummeled Ukraine with thousands of missiles, drones, and other weapons, often facilitated from Iran and North Korea, and with many dual-use components imported from the People's Republic of China. Since March, Russia escalated its attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, including the most recent strikes in November, forcing households to endure rolling blackouts just as the first snow falls in Ukraine. Putin's bet is simple. He thinks he can literally freeze Ukraine into submission. He thinks he can break Ukraine's economy and Ukrainians' resolve to defend themselves. He thinks he can wait out the will of Europe, the United States, and Ukraine's international partners. But that will not happen. When Congress passed the Supplemental Appropriations Act in April, with overwhelming 70% bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate, the United States continues to surge our security assistance and other forms of assistance. Since February 2022, we've committed over $100 billion, with $65 billion in security assistance, including air defense systems, precision, aerial, and anti-armor munitions, HIMARS, artillery rounds, armored vehicles, small arms, and equipment. This includes the $725 million in support Secretary Blinken announced last week. Together with support provided by our allies and partners, Ukraine has managed to tenaciously defend a 600-mile front, push back the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, and even capture Russian territory in Kursk. So this is a pivotal period on the battlefield, and it's a pivotal period for economic recovery. But let me focus on the economic recovery side, since that is the set of responsibilities I took over from Secretary Pritzker just a few months ago. So let me do 3 things with you this morning, and then, as I said, take your questions. 1, go a little bit deeper into where we are on the economic recovery piece. 2, talk about what we now call the Pritzker Plan, which I am happy to continue to implement. And 3, very briefly on some of the things we're doing internally and the way ahead. So, on the economic recovery side, look, against the backdrop of war, Ukraine's economy is actually quite alive, resilient, and beating the odds. Ukraine's GDP grew 5% last year. It's on track to potentially grow more than 3% this year. Iron production is up 21%. Sunflower oil production is up 14% in 2024. Grain production is up 7%. And despite Black Sea attacks, Ukraine has exported more than 100 million tons of goods in 2024. a 36.2% increase compared to the same period last year. The investment climate in 2024 has improved over 2023, driven largely by EU membership negotiations, better access to the EU single market and energy system, and significant improvements in user-friendly government services like Ukraine Invest, DIA Business, and DIA.City. These efforts give investors access to e-residency, easy tax and registration, research guides on regulation, and a network of business support centers. So despite Russia's brutal war, Ukraine is actually creating the conditions for its economic dynamism now. That investment is already beginning to yield dividends in terms of future Ukrainian, European, and U.S. private sector activity. U.S. banks are actually onboarding new clients. Brand name U.S. companies are opening new stores. Dry ports are expanding as Ukraine's export prowess stretches westward on road, river, and rail. 57% of private sector actors expect the economic situation to remain the same or improve by 2025, as reflected in overall business sentiments. And the reason is simple. Ukraine has so much to offer the world economically. Massive titanium, lithium, graphite, and rare earth metal deposits. Has the world's largest reserves of black soil, currently producing food to feed 100 million people, primarily in Africa, South America, and Asia, with the potential to produce for 500 million more. It has key energy potential, including Europe's largest gas storage, and it has 4 trillion cubic meters of fuel reserves. But Ukraine's people, its people, are its greatest assets. Minds like Igor Sikorsky, the Ukrainian-born Kyiv-trained aviation pioneer who helped bring the helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft to life. A workforce, including some abroad, most longing to come home, but have been trained in science, technology, engineering, and aerospace, with an entrepreneurial drive that is almost unparalleled. Last year, 37,000 new businesses were registered in Ukraine. More than half were founded by women. I met some of these female entrepreneurs in Kyiv last month. They had growing businesses in technology and healthy snacks, sustainable clothing, household items, employing hundreds of Ukrainians. These businesses are conquering markets on Etsy and in shops around the world, even in Ukrainian Village in Chicago. What's more, they have plans to set up production here in the United States. And for the American private sector, interest in Ukraine continues to climb. Just last month, I met with business delegations from California, North Carolina, and Washington State. They brought dozens of representatives of companies working in construction, manufacturing, and green tech to the Rebuild Ukraine conference in Warsaw. More U.S. companies this year than in 2023. They are ready to be part of Ukraine's economic future. Now, not tomorrow, but now. But first, obviously, Ukraine must have robust security support, and our defense production here at home has helped to meet this need. We've invested in over 117 production lines across more than 31 states. 31 American states, which replenish our stocks with fresh howitzers from Minnesota, Bradley fighting vehicles from Alabama, HIMARS systems from New Jersey, all of which are modernizing American armed forces. I was privileged to join President Zelensky in his visit to General Dynamics factory in Scranton in September, where the 155-millimeter shells coming off the assembly lines are saving Ukrainian lives, and President Zelensky said that directly to the workers there. And I saw firsthand the mutual admiration and respect the Ukrainians and Pennsylvania factory workers have for each other, both working around the clock in the service of a just cause. Now, American support in all of this has been essential, and the Biden administration has been with Ukraine's defenders, workers, and farmers every step of the way. We have led an effort to support Ukraine's full-scale economic comeback and create the enabling conditions for the private sector to play a catalytic role in Ukraine's economic recovery. In total, we've provided more than $33.1 billion in economic assistance since February of 2022. This includes $28.1 billion in budget support to help keep their government functioning and their tax revenue going to support their war effort. Now, Ukraine has used this crucial lifeline to support their 57,000 first responders, including firefighters who extinguish flames unleashed by Russian and Iranian weapons. They've used it for their 517,000 doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers who tend to veterans, wounded soldiers, and children, and that they've used it for the tens of thousands of teachers working to ensure Ukraine's next generation can remain at home and get a good education. On this, it's worth noting it's American allies and partners who are shouldering most of the weight, providing twice the level of economic assistance we are. So we hear that argument a lot about what do our international partners do? Well, in this case, they're providing twice the level of economic assistance that we are. And it has been widely reported recently, as part of our $50 billion G7 commitment, the United States is providing $20 billion more in extraordinary revenue acceleration loans serviced by the windfall revenues from immobilized Russian sovereign assets. Together with our allies, Canada and Japan, the loan proceeds will be provided through a new Financial Intermediary Fund, or FIF, for Ukraine at the World Bank to support the disbursement of our joint project. In fact, the U.S. announced the transfer of our $20 billion loan to the FIF just 2 days ago. Now, our assistance is making Ukraine's private sector-driven recovery and reconstruction possible, and this is the key to making it sustainable and durable. And this comes on top of the $230 million already planned to support Ukraine's private sector, including new financing for farmers, craftspeople, manufacturers, and small businesses in rural and underbanked communities. We expanded funding for Ukrainian entrepreneurs and business leaders, from small businesses to tech founders, to spend time at American companies, incubators, and universities to work alongside their U.S. counterparts and build new markets in the United States. And we crafted a new multi-million-dollar joint science and innovation fund for Ukraine to commercialize cutting-edge research in the service of Ukraine's economic development. Our assistance is also quite focused. We're focused on resilience in key sectors like energy, agriculture, transportation and logistics, the defense industrial base, and technology. So just a few words on each of those. In energy, if you take Ukraine's energy sector, perhaps the most urgent lifeline for the country's economic survival is in the energy sector. Underscored by the Energy Resilience MOU Secretary Blinken and Minister Subaya signed last week, we are rushing $825 million for emergency economic assistance to help fortify power generation, repair the grid, deploy more massive protection of energy infrastructure, provide backup power options, and restore gas storage facilities. And our leadership has had a catalytic effect. Through the G7 plus Ukraine Energy Group led by the State Department, our partners have announced an additional $1 billion to repair and strengthen Ukraine's energy sector in recent months, bringing total G7 plus support to Ukraine's energy sector to $5 billion since February 2022. The American private sector, I'm proud to say, is providing key support, helping to secure Ukraine's long-term energy sector. For example, Westinghouse is helping Ukraine to free itself from Russia's nuclear energy control by providing nuclear fuel to support Ukraine's nuclear reactors. GE Vernova and the manufacturing giant Honeywell have signed recent deals to expand Ukraine's wind and solar, and to help Ukraine diversify its gas supplies away from Russia. U.S. companies are signing contracts to provide U.S. LNG directly to Ukraine. That's on energy. On agriculture, this is the crown jewel of Ukraine's traditional economy, agriculture. The United States has delivered generators to agricultural partners that enable them to export 167,000 tons of grain, despite the power outages. We've supported trade talks for an export agreement on grain and wheat with Nigeria, one of the world's largest grain buyers. We've opened credit lines for farmers. We've provided them with seeds and equipment. And importantly, the State Department and USAID have also worked to ensure that demining efforts advance Ukraine's economic recovery. The United States is Ukraine's largest demining donor in Ukraine. In September, we committed an additional $102 million to bring our total demining commitment to $284 million. Thanks to our efforts, Ukraine has already demined an area the size of Belgium thus far and is launching new projects to demine thousands of hectares of arable land. So the Biden administration recognizes that agriculture has been and will continue to be one of the backbone sectors of the Ukrainian economy. And for this reason, I am pleased to announce here today that working with Congress, we will provide an additional $74.7 million to support export-oriented agriculture so Ukraine's farmers and food processors can play a greater role in Ukraine's economic comeback. Flanked by the, quote, ABCD of agriculture private sector, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus, we are supporting Ukraine to get quality Ukrainian produce and grains on family tables around the world. And to do so, Ukraine has to keep working to keep its ports operating, the trains of the UZ or the Ukrainian railways, the iron people freighted with cargo, and customs and border crossings to the EU market open, efficient, clean, and accountable. That is why I also want to announce that working with Congress, the United States will provide more than $223 million in additional support to rebuild Ukraine's transportation and infrastructure and logistics. So I'm very pleased we could do this here at CSIS, Dan, to announce these two funding commitments. We have two more to come up, so those are the first two. So this includes upgrading Ukraine's EU market, border crossings, as well as the Black Sea and Danube River ports, renovating the rail segments in EU border areas, and enhancing Ukraine's ability to export goods to the European Union. Now let me say a word about defense and the defense industrial base. Ukraine's defense industrial base has grown more than tenfold since February 2022. Of course, that is driven by the war needs of today, but once the war ends, Ukraine will have one of the most modern, competitive defense industrial bases in Europe, able to take global market share from Russia and supply allies with NATO standard munitions and equipment. The U.S. has helped to drive that growth, and with it, transform Ukraine's defense industry into a modern, Western-facing sector. We created an interagency deal team, together with Commerce and DoD, to unleash more joint U.S.-Ukraine defense co-production on Ukrainian soil with U.S. industry, Ukrainian and other partners, including 3 co-production deals between U.S. and Ukrainian defense manufacturers for small and medium caliber munitions made in and for Ukraine, and the first co-production deal between Ukraine and a U.S. prime defense company, Northrop Grumman. We used foreign military financing funds to launch a nearly $2 billion Ukraine Defense Enterprise Fund that is pioneering additional key defense production deals with Ukrainian counterparts as we speak. American defense CEOs have marveled at the real-time, cutting-edge innovation of Ukraine's defense production, the real-time Igor Sikorsky-style ingenuity brought forward to 2024. The same is true with Future Force Technologies. Ukraine's cyber warriors, its tech entrepreneurs, and citizen programmers are turning their patriotism into digital innovation. Some of the most dynamic innovation ecosystems have developed in small, open economies facing a persistent threat from a geopolitical rival. That existential threat can create a sense of national mission that facilitates an interdisciplinary approach to state-sponsored R&D and overcomes the challenges of a small domestic market. This has been the case, for example, in Taiwan, Estonia, South Korea, and Israel, all of which have developed globally competitive technology innovation ecosystems, which are also linked closely to their defense sector. That's why the $100 million in new American cybersecurity assistance I announced 3 weeks ago in Warsaw is both a form of security and economic support. In fact, Ukraine's tech sector overall grew 7% in 2022, despite a 29% decline in the economy. It has maintained 95% of its capacity and continues to support over 5,000 tech companies employing nearly 300,000 developers. The war has actually led to a new crop of startups focusing on emerging technologies such as AI, which could play a more important role in increasing operational efficiency, saving money, time, and even accelerated adoption of e-governance. Take the DIA app, Ukraine's USAID-funded all-in-one government on your smartphone app. It has more than 20 million monthly users, 60-plus government services, a digital passport, facilitates access to justice, services, and in the early phase of the 2022 invasion was a source of embedded TV and radio. DIA code was made open source this year, with several countries interested in replicating it for their digital services across the world, from Ecuador to Colombia to Zambia to Kosovo. Government efficiency, I know it's a topic of some interest. So that is the economic side, and I appreciate you letting me go into some detail. Very briefly, let me just update you on the what we call the Pritzker plan, because her vision really let us continue running at full speed here. And when I was U.S. Ambassador to India, she was Secretary of Commerce. To have Secretary Pritzker as Secretary of Commerce when you're sitting in New Delhi is one of the greatest gifts you could ask for. To have a Secretary of Commerce call you each day to say, what are you doing for the U.S.-India economic relationship is unusual, and it was terrific. So very proud to follow in her footsteps. But look, Ukraine's reconstruction will be the largest undertaking since the Marshall Plan. But unlike the Marshall Plan, where the United States spearheaded the reconstruction of multiple nations, Ukraine's recovery involves a broad coalition of contributors, countries, businesses, and NGOs focused on rebuilding a single nation. Crucially, it is not Ukraine's partners who are charting the course forward. Ukraine itself is leading the way, guided by a clear vision and steadfast commitment to its economic revival and integration into the European Union. The Ukraine Donor Platform, the club of leading countries that join with Ukraine to support reconstruction and economic recovery, is a testament to what the international donor community can do when it collaborates. In 2024, the UDP, as we call it, made great strides, systematizing the international effort to support reform, launching the Business Advisory Council under American and German leadership, and holding its first steering committee meeting in Kyiv. But if it's going to reconstitute itself as the economic Ramstein it has the potential to be, it must provide Ukraine with the steady hand on setting the overarching framework for reconstruction, economic recovery, and Euro-Atlantic integration in a way that actually catalyzes private sector investment. Now, the 5-point Pritzker plan, which Penny laid out several months ago, offers a roadmap for how this can be done. Here are the 5 points. First, equipping Ukraine with the planning capacity to provide strategic guidance and connective tissue across the Ukraine's government with oblasts and cities and to the international donor community, and most importantly, to the private sector. Second, pushing the accelerator button together with the World Bank, EIB, EBRD, and others to set up project preparation facilities to broaden the bench of shovel-ready projects from a dozen to hundreds. Third, deepening the reform agenda and attacking corruption, particularly in areas like customs that will put money in Ukrainian national coffers and create a more trustworthy environment for investors. Fourth, marshaling capital, for example, in terms of insurance, banking, debt, and equity. And fifth and finally, getting Ukraine's refugees, internally displaced people, and veterans home, trained, and fully integrated into Ukraine's economy. These form the building blocks of Ukraine's long-term economic recovery around which the UDP and private sector can rally. On each, the United States making tangible investments to compress the time between the cessation of hostilities and Ukraine's full-scale recovery. So again, what are we actually doing? First and foremost, Ukraine must continue to get reconstruction management right. This means addressing the twin challenges that Secretary Pritzker outlined in her plan, project prioritization, and the ability for infrastructure projects to absorb capital. On the first point, our mission here is to help Ukraine reinforce the country's ability to do sound strategic planning and project prioritization. Given frontline manpower needs, there is a workforce gap that for the moment must be filled creatively with surge capacity, specifically in key fields like engineering and project management at the core of sound reconstruction infrastructure planning. This capability, modeled after the modern Marshall Plan, will be fundamental to Ukraine's current approach to reconstruction. And to address the second challenge, absorption capacity, Ukraine needs the ability to get each of its infrastructure projects, the port terminals, the rail links, the distributed energy generation, from an idea to an actual investment. That means putting them through the life cycle of project design, feasibility studies, document preparation, subcontracting designs, and environmental impact studies, all in line with EU standards. As a builder, Secretary Pritzker knew that this often unglamorous work was actually essential for reconstruction to succeed. So today, I am pleased to announce the United States, working with Congress, will provide $35 million to the Ukraine Recovery Trust Fund to support the Ukraine government's own internal project preparation facility, co-developed together with the World Bank. And crucially, this PPF will sit in Ukraine's Office of Public-Private Partnership. This will help make the process of reconstruction a more seamless partnership between public capital and private enterprise with more user-friendly interfaces for the private sector. And on capital mobilization, the United States has also made significant strides to support Ukraine. Over the past year, we've helped Ukraine's war risk insurance market. We supported the Marsh McClellan's $50 million Unity facility that launched in January to help open Black Sea shipping to export life-saving grain. We followed by supporting the Development Finance Corporation to launch a new $50 million, first-of-its-kind, war risk reinsurance facility with Ukrainian insurance provider ARX, in collaboration with broker Aon, which went online November 1st. This actually unlocked more than $200 million in new coverage in agriculture, retail, renewables, and elsewhere, and already these are having a cascading effect, driving down war risk premiums and providing a path to a new insurance facilities for energy infrastructure, and even laying the groundwork for future civil aviation insurance to get airlines back over Ukrainian skies to airports in Lviv and Kyiv. Now, in 2025, the donor community's collective mission must be to provide catalytic capital that bridges from a public to private sector-led recovery. And as one of America's leading investors once said, private equity can give the sign where, quote, smart money will go. Horizon Capital, Ukraine's largest equity investor, supported by the U.S. government, has shown 20 to 25% return on investment in the past 2 years. Just this summer, one of Ukraine's female-founded tech startups, Creatio, gained unicorn status with a $1.2 billion valuation. Already steps are underway to catalyze more private equity, more private credit, and venture capital. And even as we continue to drive capital, we must recognize that clean, sound, accountable governments will perhaps be the biggest determinant of private sector investment. 8 out of 10 Ukrainians support for further economic reform. Our support must empower that transformative change Ukrainians can believe in deeper anti-corruption, de-oligarchization, but also closing the door to the next generation of oligarchs and enforcing and reinforcing the rule of law and a level playing field for business. That's why the U.S. has supported Ukraine in its passage of more than 20 business-friendly laws and regulations necessary to create the right conditions for private sector investment. And finally, we are working to address one of the most critical vulnerabilities for Ukraine's future economic comeback, getting its people back to work. We must support Ukraine to prepare core elements of its future workforce: refugees, internally displaced people, veterans and women, armed with skills necessary to rebuild Ukraine as a modern, digital-driven country. We have supported Ukrainians to obtain textile worker qualifications and projects to train and employ women in high-demand, traditionally male-dominated fields like truck driving, welding, and operating heavy machinery. And in this bid for Ukraine's economic recovery, the United States is firmly on the side of Ruslana, the riveter. But as Ukraine's reconstruction needs increase, scaling a workforce ready to meet those demands, again, I am announcing today, and this is our final and fourth announcement, working with Congress, the United States will surge more than $105 million in new funding to train and equip Ukrainians for tomorrow's jobs in reconstruction and industry. So you've been very kind to let me lay out this amount of detail, and Dan, I will wrap up. And make no mistake, our collective support across the Euro-Atlantic and indeed over 50 countries isn't charity. Putin's war is about reconstituting a dictatorial, corrupt empire that seeks to undermine the shared values of NATO and the EU throughout the world with a tangible impact to America's economic and security interests. Both friends and adversaries across the world are watching to see how the U.S. and our allies and partners respond. I've personally seen firsthand the impact of our support at a U.S.-funded center for children forcibly transferred or deported from Ukraine's east. I joined a group of kindergartners painting beautiful pictures on satchels in bright yellows, blues, reds, and greens. I visited Ukraine's national police to see firsthand how they are using cutting-edge equipment, ISR drones, counter-drone and jamming technology, protective gear, demining equipment, and armored vehicles provided with U.S. funding. I've met with the makers of Ukraine's Vampire drones, who with U.S. assistance transferred an idea from their garage into 27 factories, 2,000 workers, thousands of 3D printers. There is more work to do. That's why we've also established an enterprise-wide Ukraine Economic Recovery Working Group at the State Department. We've identified 20 priority projects that we're driving. And as the U.S. economic recovery continues into 2025 and beyond, new objectives will join that current line of effort. For instance, we must accelerate our cooperation with Ukraine on investment screening with the goal that reconstruction is in line with the EU and NATO critical infrastructure needs. Let me close with something personal. So I've been exposed to Ukraine's greatness actually all my life through the vibrant Ukrainian American community in Pittsburgh, not too far from my hometown of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. In fact, at the University of Pittsburgh famous Cathedral of Learning, the neo-Gothic skyscraper that towers over the city, there are 31 nationality rooms depicting the ethnic groups that forged America's city of steel. In 1937, Pittsburgh's Ukrainian-American community advocated for their own nationality room in the wake of the Holodomor, the state-sponsored famine inflicted by Stalin that led to the deaths of millions of Ukrainians. It wasn't until 53 years later, in 1990, that Ukraine finally got its nationality room, just as Ukraine was emerging from Soviet oppression as an independent state. That nationality room is filled with the symbols of wheat, sunflowers, trees of life, national heroes, the trident icon of the Ukrainian nation, and an engraved quote on the wall by Ukrainian philosopher Grigory Skovoroda, quote, "Let the bright sun bring the light, let the dark disappear." For the millions of Ukrainian soldiers, farmers, mothers, students, the iron people of the Ukrainian railways and entrepreneurs, we must stay committed to making that vision a reality. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Ambassador. That was great.
Thank you.
That was a lot of announcements. No, that's good.
We don't often get to make 4 announcements in one
Yeah,
speech,
exactly,
so,
exactly. We need to do this soon.
Yes. That's what I understand.
I understand. All right,
Yeah.
so I've got a ton of questions, but I know there's a lot of smart people here, and I want to be respectful of your schedule. So I thought that was really quite complete. I want you to talk about loans. So
Yeah.
the Lend-Lease, the British got Lend-Lease loans in World War II starting in 1939. Do you know, Ambassador, what year they paid back their Lend-Lease loans?
I don't.
2006.
Wow.
So my thought is if Ukraine was given, 60 years to pay back loans at, 0.5%, it strikes me as that could be a big part of the future we've talked a lot about American generosity. I suspect there's going to be a lot of conversations about loans. I know the Biden administration announced recently a loan. Do you want to just talk a little bit about loans?
Yeah, and look, I think this is a super innovative and creative way to support Ukraine's economic recovery. Give so much credit to Dilip Singh at the White House, who really was an architect behind this. But if you think of the damage to Ukraine's economy, some estimates, it ranges in the 500 billion range, and that's just today. As this war continues and the impact to the population grows, that number is going to grow substantially. And, again, with our EU partners, with the Russian seized assets that are sitting in Europe, Dilip and his colleagues were able to construct this $50 billion package to leverage that corpus of Russian seized assets. And again, we will be providing $20 billion in loans to the World Bank, to the new facility that has been set up. Those will be provided on the economic side to support Ukraine's, again, economic needs.
Yeah.
The Canadians, the Japanese, and others will come in with additional money. The Europeans themselves will come in with a big tranche. I think it's upwards of 20 billion, 25 billion as well. And so that'll have a huge impact, again, being paid back on the revenue generated by the seized assets over a period of time. The details on the payback in your historical example, I think, is important, but I think we learned from it, and I think it's a very smart and compelling way to proceed.
Great. So, Ambassador, I got lots of other questions, but I know there's lots of smart people here. I thought the announcements were really important on the right topics. I want to call on a couple people first, and then I'm going to take open questions. I'm hoping to hear from my friend Natalie Jaresko, who's the former finance minister of Ukraine and also a member of our commission, and also was the debt workout lead for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. And then I want to hear from David Malpass, who's the former president of the World Bank, who's also here. But I want to first hear from my friend Natalie Jaresko. I'm sure you have some thoughts.
A couple experts.
Yeah. They can thank me later for cold calling them.
Right,
Sorry,
right.
Natalie. But I know I can because you're my friend, and so
That's
thanks.
a good reason, right?
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
thank the United States for all the incredible support it's given to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how this policy will move forward. I understand that the money's being surged now, and I understand we have that capacity with the authorizations, but what happens after this? Maybe that leads to maybe a little bit of Dan's question. Are there elements that the future Trump administration would be more open to, like Lend-Lease for military support? And do you think, are you having conversations with the transition on Ukraine?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the transition team, I think, just announced its point person for the State Department transition, I think, yesterday. And so we are prepared to have those briefings immediately once they arrive to the State Department. And there is a tradition of how to do this. We know how to do transitions, and we will brief them on every detail. Now, I can't predict what happens in the future, but what I can say is when you look at let me stay in my lane on the economic side for a second, which is when I talk about, this is not charity. This is about protecting Ukraine. This is about American and European and other strategic international interests. But also the economic reality, when you just look at the defense sector, the 131 production lines across the country, the incredible investment. But also, as I said in my remarks, this is about the private sector now kind of picking up the baton and leading. It doesn't mean that government support goes away. In fact, government support will continue to be important. Frankly, I know there was a lot of debate over the supplemental spending bill, but go ahead, I'd encourage people to go back and look at the fact that 70% of the Congress supported that supplemental spending bill. It'd be hard for me to think of another issue in America today where you could get 70% of the House and Senate to come together. So let's see what is actually needed on supplemental spending. I do think the private sector is already racing. On one of my earlier trips, we took representatives from the private sector. They were already way down the line in conversations or already involved in defense industrial-based co-production. So again, I can't control what happens, what decisions the next team makes. We will make it, as clear and apparent of why this is so much in America's national interest to continue to support the Ukrainian people in their fight for democracy and freedom. And that's all I can do.
Here's a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
May I ask you to also include confiscation, specific confiscation of those Russian sovereign assets as a source? I know the United States doesn't have a great deal of those assets, but with the ERA legislation already adopted, I really hope that will be part of the transition.
So the questions about confiscation of Russian assets.
Yeah. Well, look, I can tell you just, again, about the ERA project, which is, a bit of a first of its kind, even though there is historical precedent to use Russian seized assets. And I think, look, Russia needs to pay for the damage that it has inflicted, and that is the overarching, I think, common theme that you would think would carry through, and credit, again, to our White House colleagues and European partners who have come up with this very, very important mechanism to make sure that Russia is held accountable.
David Malpass.
Hi, David
Hi, David.
Malpass. Thank you, Secretary. That was very interesting and really good to have all so many details. I was struck by the complexity of it, and so I wanted to ask you about the timeline for any actual projects. You mentioned the defense industrial base and also the Horizon Fund, but will there be any timeline for actual investments in the infrastructure of commerce or of agriculture? It still is basically lacking.
Well, I think I would say the investments are taking place today, right? If you look at what's happening on rebuilding and protecting the energy infrastructure, our companies, our dollars are at work today. When you look at the co-production deals that were announced, much of that work is already taking place. Now, we've launched some new announcements, which are exciting, about expanding that. The grain investments, the agriculture investments have already been made. Your point about what's coming down the pipeline, we tried to give you a little bit of vision for that, but there is much more in the pipeline. Talked to a lot of private equity. Part of this job about attracting capital is you go out and tell this story. And I've done that now in European capitals, New York, around this country. there is no shortage of interest from people. The key is to channel it into the sectors that the Ukrainians actually have told us they need, right? So we're not running all over the place. And again, we mentioned those: energy, defense, industrial base, agriculture, transportation and logistics, high-tech, critical minerals. Those are the 6 sectors that they've told us they want the most focus on. Then the other part of this is really the absorptive capacity, building up the capability set, going from idea to shovel-ready project. That's where your former institution and all the work of your former colleagues is going to be so important in the project preparation facility. And just, again, for a country that was not at war, handling this amount of investment and this complexity of projects would be a huge undertaking. To have a country fighting a hot war on the battlefield while doing economic recovery is a big undertaking, and that's why we all need to be there to support that part of it too. So, long answer to your question, I would say a lot of investments have already occurred, and there's a lot more in the pipeline that I think you will see on a fairly regular basis.
All right, time for one more question. Okay.
You want to take
My
2
friend,
together?
Ambassador Michael.
Thank you, Jim Michael. Mr. Secretary, your description of the complexity of this is something that has stuck with me also, because I've seen in other countries efforts to marshal resources and institutional capacities to deal with complex situations, and none as complex as is faced by Ukraine. And I just wonder, how do you see them doing in responding to this enormous challenge?
Look, I actually think they're doing quite well. And when you see just the level of energy, how hard people are working, I mean, literally around the clock. And when I meet with American investors and American companies, their experience is actually so positive, right? It is, we took our first trip into Ukraine, or we did our first deal, or we engaged with the Ministry of Finance. They are actually reporting back very positive, efficient results. Now, we have to stay on that. Ukraine has a big reform agenda. So if you think about what we're trying to do, and I say we are trying to do, this is Ukrainians-led. What we are trying to support is getting this money in, turning this into real projects that transform people's lives, that improve safety, helping on the workforce coming back in, doing the reforms at the same time. So there's a lot of balls in the air at the same time. That's why I'm hopeful and confident that our level of attention and enthusiasm to this effort continues in the level that it is today. It's just so critically important. If you care about rule of law, you care about security, you care about democracy, you care about people's futures, this is vitally, vitally important to Ukrainian interests, to our partners, to U.S. interests, but really to security and stability around the world.
All right, please join me in thanking the Deputy
Thank you.
Secretary. Thanks very much.
Thank you.